right, everybody. I am so excited to have Alan Twigg on the show today. And we are going to get such good information from him. He's, as I had said, from Bent Ericksen, and he's going to be just giving us some really good resources. So, Alan, as you are here on Hey Docs, one of the things I like to do is just kind of have my guests start off by telling us a little bit about themselves, how you got into the industry. Tell us a little bit about the business.
Yeah, sure. So thank you for having me. It's wonderful to be here and super excited to chat with you. So we've been in this world for over 40 years. Our company was founded by a guy named Bent Ericksen, and he just started working with dentists doing things like employee handbooks and job descriptions and all that fun stuff that nobody really wants to do, but everyone needs to do. And my father, Tim Twigg, bought the company from Bent back in 2002, and we've grown it nationwide. And we've got a really awesome team here that serves the clients. And so we're just really passionate about HR, and especially HR compliance and keeping people out of trouble and making sure that just the whole HR employment side of their practice is just running nice and smooth. And so that translates into basic stuff like employee handbooks and job descriptions and keeping things up to date over time when state rules or federal rules change. And then we also have a team of folks we call HR specialists, and they're kind of our in-house experts in HR. And they just spend all day talking to clients about everything from basic things like how do you do wage and hour things and sick leave to more complicated stuff like pregnancy or terminations. Yeah. So it's just our passion. I know for most people, HR is not the most exciting topic out there in the world of dentistry, but we enjoy it and we get a lot of satisfaction from it too.
Yeah, that's great. And one of the things I love about your company and have loved working with you guys over the years is it's not like it's such a big company that when you call in or when you're talking to somebody, you're just being bounced around, which is, I think, really nice also, because nobody likes to have to call and ask questions about HR. But when you do, you want to, hopefully be talking to somebody that remembers who you are and all of that. So one of the things that I get asked a lot, and, I work with doctors all over the United States especially with my startups, is how important is a handbook? And what I want to know from you, from the HR standpoint, is how important do you think a handbook is in an orthodontic office? Because I have a lot of docs that'll be like, hey, Jill, okay, come on. I've got, I've been collecting handbooks since I started my associateship. And I think I can just kind of mush them all together and put a logo on it and call it good. So tell me a little bit from your perspective. How important is a handbook? How does it help us? How could it hurt us? Let's just start right there, because I think that's kind of some of the baseline for our practices.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I would say one of the big things with a handbook is to avoid misunderstandings. Misunderstandings are just absolutely toxic in a practice. And especially for a brand new employee that's starting out and they're in their first few months of work, having misunderstandings about when their benefits kick in or what they're eligible for, or thinking they were going to get something when they were first hired and they're not, those kind of things are just terrible. Because in the beginning, we're establishing a new relationship with this employee. We're building trust and we're building a true relationship. And so we want to make sure that there's no gaps in expectations. And having everything documented keeps everyone on the same page. The doctor doesn't have to remember, okay, what did I do last time when I hired someone? Did they get it this way or did they get it that way? So that's super important. Another thing is that it gives the doctor a leg to stand on if they need to do some sort of coaching. Because again, in the beginning or even down the road, there may be some little corrections that need to be made. Yes. Yeah. And having everything documented where you can fall back on that is super helpful. In some cases, having things documented is actually required by law. One example would be in California, you're actually required to have a written anti-harassment and discrimination policy. Another example would be some practices want to forfeit sick leave or vacation at the end of a year or at termination. And in a lot of states, that's fine. Some states don't allow it. But if you're in a state that allows it, that's fine. But it has to be documented in order for that to be enforceable. So there are some examples where things do need to be documented. I think the biggest thing, though, with handbooks is you want to set people up for success. And with handbooks and job descriptions and offer letters and all of that, it really speeds up the onboarding process. And it really allows this person to hit the ground running as soon as possible, get them sort of molded in with the culture and the rest of the team as quickly as possible. So the other team isn't stressed out having to constantly train this person or correct this person. And it just has the whole thing flow a lot better.
I love that. And, I get asked a lot, well, what details, should I spell everything out to the, to the ultimate, every single thing that could possibly happen? Is it better to be vague? And I know you guys will help. I mean, the beauty of working with a company like yours is you'll actually design this handbook to be what we need. But what can you speak to that just a little bit? Because I think you can maybe have too much that could hurt you, maybe not enough that could, can you speak to that just a little bit?
Oh, sure. Yeah, the way I characterize handbooks and policy manuals is there's three types of policies. So the first type would be benefits, and those are just whatever the benefits are that you offer. And those need to be crystal clear about who's eligible, when they're eligible, what they get, and what happens at the end of the year, and all of that spelled out. The second type of policies is what we call required policies. These are things that are based on state rules or federal rules, things like at-will employment, equal opportunity, anti-harassment. Those are pretty standard HR compliance kind of type policies. And then the third category would be things like management policies, things like cell phone usage, smoking, appearance, uniforms, the kind of things that are just really necessary for just everyday employee interaction and working as a team. So those are kind of three main categories. And then within each category, of course, there's a bunch of policies. To your question about is more specific better? In general, yeah, more specific is better. And we want to recognize that if this thing is 200 pages long, nobody's going to be reading that thing. So there is absolutely a balance. And I think, in our case, we've been around the block so many times with working with orthodontists and practices on what's common and what kind of situations come up. So we know what really should be in there. And we also know kind of when you start veering into a territory where it's like, okay, this is a little bit too much detail. Yeah. And so there is an element of that. You asked earlier about, can you kind of cobble together something from various sources? And to that, I would say you kind of get what you pay for, right? And it's not that you can't, write a really great handbook yourself. You certainly can. It's we're dealing with people who are very well educated and they're incredibly smart and they have their businesses and they're successful and all of that. So you can spend hours and hours Googling and researching and figuring out whether what you've written is compliant and do you have everything that should be in there. I just think that it's a matter of what's your time worth and what's the best use of your time. Yeah. It's really a time versus money thing. And it's worth thinking about things like, would you do your own taxes? Would you write your own associate contracts? Would you build your own website? Or is there value in hiring someone to do that? I was doing a remodel on my house several years ago and learned very quickly that I am not good at drywalling. I can do it, but it doesn't turn out very well. It takes forever. And so it's just, hiring a professional to do things kind of makes a big difference. Yeah.
And I just have to speak to what's going on. I think even right now in society coming out of COVID, I know there's been a lot of changes in law in regard to how sick time is done and, different things like that. And I think a lot of times we may have a policy manual in effect and then not think about it anymore and maybe not even know that we need to be going back and checking those state regulations or whatnot. And I know that having a company like Bent Ericksen or others out there that are, up on your state laws really can help. And I can assume keep a lot of doctors out of trouble, especially if they are trying to enforce something that is no longer enforceable or they're missing out on something for sure. So this kind of leads me into my next question. So as you know, I work with a lot of docs who are doing acquisitions. Mm-hmm. And, it's a new doc coming into a practice. Can you talk a little bit about that and what doctors should be thinking about from an HR standpoint? I know you've got some good pointers out there and resources that you can give docs. But, one of the things that I'm always talking to them about from a consultant side is you have to understand that the employment with these employees is going to terminate with the doctor once you purchase the practice, and they will now become your employees. And there are some things that we have to have in place in order to make that a smooth transition. And I think a handbook and maybe even some written offer letters and whatnot. So can you kind of talk to that a little bit? Because I feel like this is a real gray area out there for a lot of doctors and can be kind of scary too. I mean, you think about the cost of buying a practice, but I think sometimes it gets forgotten about the importance of the HR component of it there.
Oh yeah, big time. And I wish there was more awareness among the lawyers, the accountants, the brokers that are facilitating these transactions to really speak to some of the key HR pieces that can really lead to major conflicts or issues down the road after the transition takes place. One of the big things I really encourage folks to pay attention to in a transition is what is the existing pay and benefit structure of that practice.
Yes.
And especially if the current selling doctor is a little bit older, been in practice for a long time, chances are the pay scales are going to be really high. The benefits are going to be pretty lavish because that doctor doesn't have student loan debt or any other debts. And so they have been kind of giving everything away. The employees have probably been there for 10, 20, 30 years. And so that's a really big thing to look at financially. Now, there are things that can be done to alleviate that a little bit. One thing is called what we call grandfathering. And that's where maybe the current team is grandfathered into what they have been getting from a pay and benefit standpoint. But if the practice then hires a new person after the transition, they may fall in under a lower benefit level or a lower pay scale. And that's totally fine. And that can kind of help over time with some cost savings. One of the biggest things, though, is the overall culture of the practice and the management style of the selling doctor. Because especially if this team has been together for a long, long time, and for example, maybe the selling doctor is more kind of hands-off and more, I trust my employees and I want them to just kind of do their thing. And the new doctor coming in is kind of going, no, I want to be very hands-on. I want to, really manage the team, and I want to be, very involved in every decision that gets made. Okay, there's going to be a little bit of a clash there potentially.
Yes.
And so that is, there've been a number of transitions we've seen that have failed because there hasn't been an emphasis on the culture, or it just means that after the transition, it's super rocky. The team, a lot of the team members maybe quit or have to get let go. And it just isn't the dream and the wonderful transition that somebody envisioned. And like you said, a huge part of that is that the transition of the benefits are really clear, that in a sense, the selling doctor is terminating the employees as of that closing date. And then they're being hired. And because they're being hired, they're treated like brand new employees. Yep. We should be doing I-9s, W-4s, all the other normal new hire paperwork. Offer letters are fantastic.
Yes.
And all of that just to kind of start fresh and say, okay, we're drawing a line in the sand, and now this is the practice going forward. And with that, then there can always be one or two employees who are not really on board with the new changes because, of course, the new doctor inevitably is going to want to change things and make it their own practice, which is great. And there may be some team members that are just not on board with that, and they want to stick with the old one. And that's where it's just a matter of sitting them down and having that good, honest conversation about saying, look, I get it. You're used to the old way and we're not doing it that way. And we're going in this new direction, and that's a change, and change is frustrating. And at the end of the day, this is now my practice and this is the direction we're going. I would love for you to join me on this new journey. And if it's not a good fit, then let's talk about a transition.
Yep.
It's just a matter of kind of taking some of the emotion out of it and just recognizing that this is where we're going.
Yeah. And I think that is such good advice. And I say the same things to my doctors. It's hard. And again, I don't think we spend a lot of time talking about this when we are doing transitions between doctors, but you're right. It's hard on doctors to have these hard conversations. It's hard on employees to have to hear it. But I 100% believe, like you just said, if we can be as clear as absolute possible in the beginning, if we can lay out our offer letter, and even if we aren't going to grandfather them in, even if we have to say, I know this is going to be tough, but this is your new pay scale. I know you had, 401k and blah, 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 blah. And I'm a new doc coming in and I can't afford this, but here's what I can afford for you. Or I can't afford to give you, 2 months of vacation anymore. I need all hands on deck. And I need, you're going back to 3 weeks or 2 weeks or whatever it is. Those are all really tough. And you're right. It can feel very emotional. But I think, for doctors out there, what we also have to understand is you are a new doctor taking over a new practice that's got 20 years ahead of you potentially. And you also, if you can just be clear in the beginning, then the employees can make their decisions on whether they're going to stick with the practice. Hopefully they do. But at least there doesn't become this turmoil later on where you promised me this or you didn't do this or whatnot. So I love what you're saying there. And I think it's important for people to understand they are new employees. So if you have to, move ways and, part ways, it's better to send them away with love and let them, get on with their life and you get on with yours and just kind of go that route. I do have a question for you. And I don't know if you can answer this or not, but I get asked this a lot from doctors. What if I don't want to bring an employee on? So maybe they were an employee with the previous doc, and it isn't somebody who is fitting the vision of the doctor when that transition. Are they obligated to offer employment out to everybody on the previous team?
No, not at all. And I think this is a great example of how important it is that the whole transition or really the whole time leading up to the closing and all the time after is really thoughtfully laid out. I'm sure you've heard these stories where it's like the employees leave on Thursday or Friday, and then they come in on Monday and there's a whole brand new doctor there. And it's like, hey, guess what? Over the weekend, I bought your practice and I'm your new boss. Hi.
Yes,
okay, let's go see the patients. And it's like,
and I've even been a part of those. And it's like, it's so hard. It's awful.
I know. It's just painful. And I feel for the employees. I feel for the patients and everyone in that. And I think that it's so important to do it in a very thoughtful manner. And so, first of all, no, they're not obligated to rehire all of the employees. And if it's possible, ideally, there would be sort of some sit downs and some one-on-ones between the new doctor and the team, almost like an interview in a sense. Now, one thing that is a little bit tricky is we want to make sure that in a sense, the new doctor who is buying is not really using a whole lot of data from the past to make that decision. And the reason for that is it can get a little bit blurry in terms of this clear line in the sand between what happened in the past is in the past and what happens in the future is in the future.
Yes.
And maybe a more ideal transition would be something where somebody is kind of buying in, say 50-50 into a partnership, and then they're really working with the team for say 6 months, and then there's a buyout, because then they're really working with the team 100%. They know them, they get to really see their performance. But the bottom line is no, if they get the sense that this person's just not a good fit culturally and for them and what their vision is, then no, they're not under an obligation to hire them. And it's just a matter of, sitting down and having that conversation. And we can certainly, or our HR specialist can certainly guide someone
That's
through,
great.
Scripting, what to say, what not to say, and all of that. So yeah.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And I think that, that kind of somewhat segues into, unfortunately, we'll move past buying a practice, but unfortunately, we can have those team disciplinary things that come up, and your HR specialists, I know, can really help with that. But how do you, how does a doctor ensure that they're protecting themselves from liability when it comes to discipline and termination, or, just those things that none of us want to get into, but every one of us could be into just because we're business owners. And at some point in our lives, we're probably going to have to let an employee go, just like we're going to have to hire an employee. So talk a little bit about that, and even in just how you guys might be able to help, or just maybe some common things for doctors to be aware of to not get themselves maybe into trouble a little bit with that.
Oh, sure. Yeah, it's one of those things that nobody wants to do, and it's inevitable, and it's crucially important, because if you have an employee that is having kind of mediocre performance, they will become so toxic to your good employees.
Yes.
And if you let that person get away with it, then your good employees are going to say, well, hey, I'm working my butt off here, and why should I keep doing that? So with the employee that needs the coaching, one of the gold standard starting points is documentation. And ideally, we would have that employee handbook, we'd have the job description, we would have some sort of written warning or written documentation that clearly outlines this is what you're supposed to be doing, you're not doing it, it needs to get fixed. And if it doesn't get fixed, then we're going to take further action.
Yeah.
So documentation is huge. There's certainly a recognition that just any sort of disciplinary action, giving feedback, coaching, it's hard, it's challenging, it's emotional. I think it's wonderful that there's a lot of discussion just generally out there in the public these days about difficult conversations and courageous conversations. There's now business school programs dedicated to how to give these kinds of feedback, things to people. There's constantly, I'm seeing articles about it. So there's great awareness, and like everything, giving feedback and coaching employees is a skill. It's not something that you're inherently good at or inherently bad at. It's just something that takes training and practice. And we've got written how-to guides on how to do some of those things. Like you said, the HR specialists do this. They walk people through it step by step, what to say, what not to say. All of our team members have actually run HR departments, in their previous lives before they joined us. So they've been in the trenches. They know what it's like. They know the kind of the emotional side of it, the stress that comes with it. And so it's just a matter of kind of doing that preparation leading into it. And then sometimes there needs to be multiple conversations with someone, and that's fine. It's just a matter of going through it. One little tip that I'll share with you is, in general, with employees, their issues tend to be behavioral based. It's not so much that they lack a particular skill set where they need training or they need 3 or 4 weeks to learn that skill set. It's usually that they have poor behavior or a poor attitude.
Yeah.
And what we usually say when we're coaching clients on that is that behavior is something that employees can change tomorrow. They don't need 2 weeks or a month to learn how to not be a jerk to their coworkers.
Yeah.
They can start doing that tomorrow. And so when you're coaching an employee that is not getting along with coworkers, that is totally fair to say that, hey, this is behavior, and behavior can be changed immediately. So I expect to see you taking, steps in the right direction starting tomorrow. And again, if it is something that's a skill set where they do need to really take a class and practice skills or get more training, well, then we want to give them some kind of runway of a couple weeks or a month or whatever it might be. But when it comes to that behavior stuff, that really, it's okay to expect changes more rapidly on that one.
And I think that is such a great point, and I want our audience to hear that just one more time, that behavior can be changed immediately. And I think so many times I've seen this over and over with doctors in offices where, it's, I talked to them, and then, 6 months later, we're still dealing with the same behavior issue. And we, talk again, and then 6 months later. And not only is this bad behavior festering, but it's creating this really toxic environment in the office. And, by the time it's all done, and if we finally get to the point of saying, okay, enough is enough, this employee is no longer going to be on the team anymore, many times everybody is so beat down, and it's horrible on everybody, when we could have fixed it fairly quickly. And and I when I'm talking with doctors and coaching a little bit, I kind of like to have a very clear plan. I think you're going to see within 9 weeks, if you're 3, 6, 3 weeks at a time check-ins, you're going to know very, very quickly if behavior is changing or not, and if you need to make a change. And I think, letting that toxic behavior, continue on in your practice, it also shows your really good employees that, oh, well, if I decide to start slacking off a little bit, what's the big deal? Because, if this is how the worst of the worst get treated, well, then, why am I working so hard? So,
absolutely.
I think that you bring up such a great point in that regard.
And let me chime in on one thing on that. I'll just say too that it's common when you're dealing with a difficult employee to kind of do what we call managing by policy, where you want to say, okay, let me write a policy that's basically directed at this one person that is going to say that essentially what they're doing is not okay. And I get that, and it is important to have the policies and the documentation give you a leg to stand on all of that. I think one of the challenges is recognizing that a policy is meaningless unless you're going to actually enforce it.
Yes.
And a lot of times we run into clients that just want to kind of put the policy in place, and they hope that piece of paper is going to magically fix the behavior. And most of the time it doesn't. And so I really think it's important to stress that yes, having the policy is important and so on, and you're going to have to enforce it. You're going to have these difficult conversations, and you may potentially need to terminate the person over this. And if you're not prepared to terminate them, then it's like, in a sense, the policy is meaningless and the person is basically going to get away with it forever.
That's so true. And, it's hard to even think about, having to get to that point of termination, but sometimes that's just where we need to be. And in the long run, when you look back, I would challenge, anybody who's been in that position, when you look back and go, am I better off today because I got rid of that person? They are. It's never easy in the beginning, but it's usually, you look back and go, would I have changed that? No, I would not have. But when you're in it, it's just a little bit harder. So we've kind of talked a little bit about, some of the policies and the handbooks. What are some of the bigger blunders that you see, doctors, office managers, doing, and some of the potential consequences if we aren't paying attention to, some of the HR components in our office?
Sure. Well, let's see. I would say one of the big ones would be not paying wages and benefits or even overtime correctly. And we're seeing that more and more as offices are having satellite offices or forming small groups, and employees are working in multiple locations. It can be very easy not to handle overtime properly in a situation like that. Another common one would be thinking that paying someone a salary basically makes them exempt or exempt from overtime. And that's not the case. Salary and exemption are two different things. There's salary and hourly, and there's exempt and non-exempt. And that's a very commonly misunderstood topic. So I would definitely encourage folks, if you're thinking about paying someone a salary, to really do a lot of research on that, or reach out to a professional to get some guidance. Another one, since we kind of just talked about sort of coaching and handling difficult employees, a really common one we see is when an office has an employee that's not performing very well, they'll kind of try to make that employee's life miserable in the hopes that they'll quit. And usually that's done just to avoid having to pay unemployment or thinking that they're not going to have to pay unemployment. And we're not big fans of that, just because it doesn't always work the way you think it's going to work. And now you've got an employee that was performing poorly, and now they're upset because you've cut their hours or cut their wage or something. And now they're interacting with your patients, and they're even more toxic than they were before. And on the unemployment piece, there's a lot of misunderstandings about unemployment, how it works. And I'll just say on that unemployment doesn't come out of the practice's bank account. It comes out of the general state fund, and every business in the whole state pays into it. And the rates that you pay vary from state to state and industry to industry, but they're very, very small. We're talking about a couple $100 a year per employee, if that. And so having an unemployment claim in the grand scheme of things is not a big deal. Getting sued for wrongful termination or having a discrimination claim, those are a big deal. And those you definitely want to spend a lot of time making sure you avoid those. But unemployment claims are not a big deal. So I really encourage folks to, have the old HR adage of hire slowly and fire quickly. And that's going to really help them and make sure that their team is functioning as best it can.
Yeah. And I cannot agree with you more on that. I've had many, many discussions with doctors and said, the small amount, if you even get dinged on unemployment, and again, that's even if it even changes your rate at all, will be so much less than a lawsuit, or so much less than keeping a bad employee on payroll week after week after week after week. Like when you look at that, maybe a difference of $50 or $75 or whatever that changes for a little bit is so small in comparison to paying somebody a salary that you don't even want to be there. So I could not agree with you more on that, for sure. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about what is going on in our industry right now and how much I think offices are really struggling right now with hiring. And do you have any suggestions or thoughts or tips for us, in that hiring, recruiting, onboard, retention? Like, how do we get people to stay once we get them? I'd love to pick your brain on this one, because I know this is a big topic for all of us right now.
Oh yeah, huge with the pandemic and everything. I've never seen a hiring market as bad as this one is. And there are some new resources coming out. There are companies out there that will do the recruiting and hiring side of the things for the practice, which is certainly a time saver, which is nice. We're seeing some new temp agencies that are almost like Uber for temps, where you just pull out your phone and say, I want to temp tomorrow. That can be really great. We're also seeing some of those companies being a little bit playing in the gray area as it pertains to 1099 contractor status versus employee status. So I would encourage folks to be a little careful if they go that route. There's certainly best practices around interview questions and kind of the whole hiring, recruiting process, and how to make sure that you're getting a really good candidate and you're hiring for fit and not just for experience.
Yes.
So I think there's a lot of importance, and we could talk for hours about, just that piece. The thing that we really have been encouraging folks to do also is think about kind of the long game. So I think every practice can articulate their USP, their unique selling proposition. Why should a patient choose their practice versus the one down the street? And we really encourage folks to think about their UEP, or their unique employment proposition. So if there is a really awesome, high quality candidate, why should that person choose your practice versus the one down the street? And can you articulate that in a job posting or in an interview or something like that? And that, of course, touches on your whole everything. That's your culture. That's the wages, the benefits, the current team that you have, your commitment to ongoing continuing education, the technology that you have. All of that plays into the whole employee experience. I'm sure you had clients who when the initial lockdown was over and they said, okay, come back to work, they had no trouble getting employees back. Their employees said, cool, I'll see you on Monday, because that practice had built a really solid, awesome culture. And with the Great Resignation, or my favorite term was the Great Rethink, where it gave people those however many months to really assess, okay, is this what I want to be doing with my life? And is my time worth spending in this type of environment? There were, of course, all kinds of offices that when they said, hey, we're going back to work, their employees said, no way, no how, I am not coming back to work for you. And so I really think that it's important for people to keep in mind that their culture drives their everything. It's the employee experience and all of that. Now, certainly if you're in a tight spot and you need an employee, then there are those resources like temps or creative thinking, hiring someone who's maybe a patient that's really awesome from a fit standpoint. They may not have any experience in dentistry, but they can learn. And that's one of the key things to keep in mind is, we can train people how to use equipment. We can train them how to use our practice management system. We can't train attitude. And yes, it would be ideal if we could get someone who's got an awesome attitude and tons of experience, but those people are going to be rare and they probably already have a job somewhere else. So yeah, it's just all of these things of really kind of the short game stuff of good interviews and resources and hiring tools and all of that. And it's the long game of your culture and really spending some good time sitting down and thinking, what is it that makes my practice unique and why should someone choose me over somebody else? And that's not just the wages and the benefits, it's the whole experience and the culture.
Yeah. And I completely agree with you again on this. I feel like in the Great Rethink or whatnot, I think even as employers, it gives us an opportunity to really look at and say, what do I want out of my next employee when I'm going to be going at this? And, like you said, am I bringing more of my culture? Am I hiring somebody that's going to really fit the culture of my practice? Am I kind of even rethinking, maybe am I looking for somebody that's just looking for a job and I'm just filling a position? Or am I actually looking to make my practice hopefully be a position that somebody's going to look at and say, I think I could have a career here. And what does that look like, for me? So I think that that's so important on both sides of it, from the employee side, but also it gives us, from the ownership side, just that opportunity too, to, maybe you step up your pay a little bit. Maybe you are way more direct with what you're looking for out of your employee, and the skill sets, reassessing, like you said, the skill sets, maybe it's more really about that personality and training them into be what you want them to be. I had just one question about hiring, because I get asked this a lot, and I don't know how much you can speak to this. I know, I know you can speak to it a lot, but I don't know how much time we have to speak on this. But if you were to say, okay, you're going through this hiring process, but here are some absolute no-goes where you cannot go if you're going to ask somebody hiring questions. Because I have a lot of docs that want to be like, well, do they have daycare? Do they have blah, 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 blah? Do they have, and I'm like, whoa, let's slow that down just a little bit. So if there was 2022, 2023, because I think it's always changing a little bit, but if you were to say, like, here's like 3 no-goes, if you're, you can ask a lot, but here's where we don't go with questions in hiring.
Oh yeah. It's a great question. It's a very important topic, and the list of topics that you don't want to bring up is quite long. Common ones are going to be pregnancy status, marital status. Do they have kids? Do they have some sort of disability? Are they, like you said, do they have daycare? Anything related to religion? There are tons of topics that we want to avoid. Now, to be clear, it's not that it's blatantly illegal to ask about that. It's that it's illegal to use that information to base your hiring decisions on.
Yes.
And a common sort of little tangent that I'll say that leads into trouble with this is when either the manager or the doctor is then looking this person up on social media, because you think, oh, well, if I see a bunch of pictures of them, getting drunk and going crazy or posting racist things or things like that, I want to know that. Well, that makes sense. And at the same time, you might learn some of these things like marital status, pregnancy status, religion, and so on. And so we generally advise people not to even, don't go there. Don't ask about those kind of things. Don't check social media. If you really feel like you have to check social media, then it would be a matter of hiring a third-party company that would do that checking. And then in theory, they would screen any of those types of protected things, and they would only send you the stuff that is legally allowable for you to know. But again, it's a gray area. It has to be a company that really knows what they're doing. They need to make sure that they're familiar with your particular state and all the various protections that are applicable in your state. So it's a tricky one for sure. And the safest thing would be just to not even go there. Don't broach the subject at all.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's great. And, I think you can find out a lot by just having conversations with your applicants and, just seeing what they will tell you and what they won't. But I agree with you. We got to be super careful. There are just those no-go areas that, yes, we'd like to know if they have, daycare because you heard that they've got 4 kids and are they going to be able to be at your office? But you don't get to ask that.
Right. Exactly.
So that's good. So, as we're kind of coming to an end here, if you were to give our docs, give our audience, maybe 3 tips that, they can really, that we haven't already talked about, that if, you think they should know about HR, what do you think that would be?
Well, let's see. I would say number 1 would be treat people well. We've talked a lot about coaching and disciplinary action and hiring and trying to find people and all of that. And the reality is that one of the things I like to say is, if there's no problem, then there's no problem. If you're treating people fairly and being conscientious and respectful, then the reality is people are going to stick around, and you may have to weed out a couple of bad apples, but after that, you're rocking with an awesome team. So treat people well and they'll stick around, and they'll, you take care of them, they'll take care of you. I think another piece with this, going back to kind of this idea of compliance and everything, is just education. I think it's important for folks to do a little bit of research. Everyone as a small business owner needs to know a little bit about marketing. They need to know a little bit about taxes and accounting. They don't need to be an expert in every single one of those topics, but as a business owner, you need to do a little bit of research. And I think HR and HR compliance is part of that. So whether that's consulting or taking classes or books or podcasts, working with an HR company, whatever it is, educate yourself.
Yeah.
And then I think a really big one for HR is just having a resource that you can call on, because you just can't write down everything that could someday occur. And even if you've done some training and gotten some basics and all of that, there's always going to be situations that are thrown at you. And it might be, something like your absolute rock star employee, your favorite employee. Maybe their spouse has a heart attack and they need to take a leave of absence, and it's okay, how are we going to handle that?
Yeah.
And having somebody that really knows HR, who you can call on, who has been around the block, who can really guide you through those kind of things, is super beneficial. Mm-hmm. So I really encourage folks to have some sort of resource that they can call on to just have that peace of mind and that confidence.
Yeah, that's great. That's such good little nuggets of information for doctors to take away. So if somebody says, this is this is exactly what I've been looking for, how do they get a hold of you? What's the next steps for them?
Well, we've got a lot of great info on our website. It's just bentericksen.com. And then folks can feel free to email me. My email is just alan@bentericksen.com, and it's ALAN. So feel free to reach out. We're always happy to help. Like I said at the beginning, HR is our favorite topic, and we're always happy to talk to folks about it. So happy to, chat with folks and what they're looking for and see if it's a good fit.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I do want to say, I know you've got different packages too. So if you're more of a startup doc listening and you're looking, to kind of get started, maybe you don't need, a full blown thing yet, you guys can help them, correct? And just, helping them find the right package that's going to fit them and their budget.
Oh, sure. Yeah, absolutely. And especially, with startups and transitions, there's a lot that we work with them on around the benefits and the pay structures and all of that. We also have 2 checklists, one that's designed for startups and one that's designed for transitions. I can send those to you. You can share them with folks if they're interested. They start months before the closing and kind of work up to the closing and a little bit after, as far as all the HR things that you really should be doing to make sure that it's a successful journey.
Yeah, that'd be great. I'm sure we can drop that into the show notes here. So if you get that to me, we'll definitely link that back out to you. So that's awesome. Great. So as we finish up, one of the things I love to do with my guests is have them do a little speed round with me. Are you ready to accept the challenge?
All right, let's do it.
All right. Coffee or tea?
Tea mostly, but I do enjoy a cup of black coffee.
Oh, I'm right there with the coffee. Though I do a lot of green tea at night before I go to bed. Just kind of like chills me out a little bit. Do you have a favorite book?
Well, other than fiction, I would say one of my favorites is Let My People Go Surfing by Yvon Chouinard, the founder of Patagonia. That one, as a business book and especially on all this stuff about culture and team and employees, phenomenal book. Highly recommend that one.
Well, I keep a running list of books and I'm always looking for new ones. So that one's going on there. I have not read that one. So
That's
great.
A good one. That's a good one.
Do you have a favorite outdoor activity?
Yeah, it would be backpacking. Love backpacking and going out in the woods.
Great. All right. And if you could be remembered for one thing, what would it be?
Ooh. On that one, I would say for me, it's inspiring others to bring about positive changes.
I love that. And then what is the best piece of advice you've ever received?
That one I would say is, it's a hard one. There's a lot. I would say for me, it's this idea of really owning your mistakes and being accountable. And I think that has so many downstream positive impacts of just owning your successes too, but really owning your mistakes. And especially as business leaders, owning that with your team is huge. And that accountability just pays massive dividends. Yes, that's great. Well, Alan, it's been just an absolute joy having you on the show. Good information. I hope you'll maybe come back on again with us and give us some more information at another date. So thank you again for being on here. Yeah, thank you, Jill. This was wonderful and happy to help with everyone. All right. Perfect. All right. Till next time. All right. Bye-bye.